The new International Development Bank has 57 member states and is expected to lend billions of dollars over the coming years. In a moment, I will talk with guests from different regions of the world to assess the significance of the AIIB, but we begin with CCTV correspondent Wang Tongxuan, who joins us from Beijing. And Tongxuan, the opening ceremony, as I mentioned, took place in Beijing on Saturday. What can you tell us about that? Who was there, and what were the major points in the president's speech?
Hi, and well, both Chinese President Xi Jinping and Premier Li Keqiang attended the opening ceremony of the AIIB, as well as the representatives from 57 member countries. Chinese Finance Minister Lou Jiwei chaired the inaugural ceremony. President Xi Jinping delivered a keynote speech in the morning and announced that China will pledge an additional $50 million to a special fund to prepare less developed countries for infrastructure projects. He also said the Chinese government firmly supports the operation of this bank as a professional, efficient and accountable multilateral financial institution, which will play a very important role in promoting sustainable economic growth in Asia and beyond. On Saturday afternoon, while addressing the inaugural meeting of the AIIB Board of Governors, Premier Li Keqiang elaborated on his vision for this newly established multilateral investment bank and the Chinese economy in the new year. He said the AIIB should draw on the useful experience of existing multilateral development institutions to identify its own role with unique features. Li also encouraged the AIIB to work with other institutions, including the Asian Development Bank, for example, and member countries to synergize development strategies by supporting infrastructure and regional cooperation.
Now, how much money is the bank expected to lend this year, and what will that money be used for?
Well, President of the AIIB, Mr. Jin Liqun, said they are expecting to offer loans to the very first batch of projects by the end of 2016. However, he didn't give an exact figure on how much money the bank will lend this year, but with authorized capital of $100 billion. He said in the beginning they will focus on several aspects, such as huge needs of Asian countries for power, and that includes electricity generation, power transmission and distribution. In terms of the traffic, they are also in dire need of road and railway construction, as well as urban development and logistics. So we are expecting to see prioritizing investment in energy, transportation, rural infrastructure. And he also said that their target projects must be financially, environmentally, and socially sustainable.
Now, the bank starts out with 57 member states. Can we expect other nations to join in the future?
Well, the short answer for you is yes. The AIIB is likely to welcome more countries on board. Just a little context for you, the bank has a clear three-tier structure, a board of governors, a board of directors, and a management team with specific powers and responsibilities. According to AIIB President Jin Liqun, nations can join as long as they receive approval from more than half of the governors who hold more than half of the voting rights. At Sunday's press conference, one reporter from Japan asked the president if AIIB's doors are open to the world's third largest economy, and the president said AIIB's doors have been flung open and it will stay open.
Okay, thanks, Tongxuan. That's CCTV's Wang Tongxuan reporting from Beijing. Joining me now from New York is Victor Gao. He is director of the China National Association of International Studies. Also with us from London is Duncan Innes-Kerr. He is regional director for Asia at the Economist Intelligence Unit. With me here in the studio is Peter Botellier. He is senior adjunct professor of China Studies at Johns Hopkins University. And from New Delhi, we're joined by Sameer Saran. He is the Senior Fellow and Vice President at the Observer Research Foundation. Welcome to all of you to the show. Victor, President Xi Jinping described the opening of the AIIB as a historic moment. Why is this development bank so important for China and, of course, for its 57 member states?
Well, definitely. Ever since the end of the Second World War, in all these decades, AIIB is the first international financial institution initiated and promoted by a developing country. And 57 countries have signed up. And on January the 16th, the formal launch of AIIB took place. This is truly a historic moment. It's a landmark occasion, and this also ushers in a new era where existing international financial institutions, including the World Bank, Asian Development Bank, will work shoulder to shoulder with newly created international financial institutions like AIIB, headed by China, in building up infrastructure and connectivity in the Asian region. This is also an occasion very much welcomed by many Asian countries where there is a huge demand for infrastructure and connectivity financial support. And AIIB will not compete with World Bank or Asian Development Bank. Rather, they will join hands working together to fill the vast void of financing demand in this particular area in the years and decades to come.
Peter, the United States is not a member of the AIIB. How is its establishment being seen by the United States?
I personally regret that the US decided not to join the AIIB. I think the reasons why are not entirely clear, but I think there was reluctance to accept the idea that this would be a positive contribution to international finance. There was concern that the AIIB might compete with the World Bank and the ADB, the older established institutions with the same kind of purpose. I believe that this was a short-sighted decision.
Soren, India is a member of the AIIB. In fact, it sits on the board. How can a country like India benefit from this membership?
So for us, the AIIB is a very useful new institution that can allow greater channeling of valuable capital for development of infrastructure, roads, ports, power plants that India is going to require in the next 1.5 decades. And India, therefore, not only is a founding partner to China in this endeavor, but also is the second largest stakeholder in the bank. And we see this clearly as a significant milestone in the rise of the rest, if you were to describe it as that, where a country from the south is now setting up rule-making, positive financial mechanism that can assist others in their growth endeavors. Just one more important point from the Indian perspective. It must be understood that if the Millennium Development Goals over the past 15 years benefited greatly from the rise of China, it is improbable that we will be able to meet our sustainable development goals unless you see India able to grow and rise as well. And for that, we will need to find all sorts of sources of funds and collaborations to make that possible.
Duncan, there are a number of European countries, members of the AIIB, significant countries like the United Kingdom, Germany, Italy. These are all developed countries. What's in it for these European nations?
Well, I think on the one hand, they certainly want to be contributing to Asia's development, but I think they also see their role as making sure that the AIIB has actually sort of lived up to the standards of governance and good practice that they've had experience developing in many other institutions. So I think we've seen their engagement so far really designed to sort of make sure that, for example, those US concerns that were expressed about issues of governance and issues of whether the infrastructure development promoted by the bank might generate popular concerns on the grounds in some of these countries, that those concerns were fully addressed. And I think from what I've been hearing, certainly from people who have been involved in the project, there is a sense that actually a lot of those concerns have receded as the bank's development has kind of moved forward.
Victor, the finance minister of Luxembourg, said at the establishment of the AIIB that this was further proof, these are his words, further proof of the rebalancing of the world economy. So how much of a game changer is this in a world where up to now Western-dominated economic institutions like the World Bank, like the IMF, have dominated?
Well, we are living in a fast-changing world, and circumstances on the ground are moving forward very fast. And if anyone wants to be complacent, he or she or the country or a block of country may be actually left behind by the fast changing circumstances. from the Chinese perspective, China now is the largest trading nation in the world, the largest economy if we use purchasing power parity as the benchmark, and the second largest economy in the world if we use the official exchange rate to measure up. And China is the largest trading nation with more than 126 countries and regions in the world. China originally wanted to promote reform within the World Bank and IMF and ADB framework. But many of these efforts, even when they are approved by IMF, for example, have not been accepted by some important countries in the world. Therefore, I think China shifted gear and promoted the establishment of AIIB. I would say AIIB itself arrived on the global scene in the right moment, mainly because there is huge demand for infrastructure and connectivity projects. And from China's own experience, we know you cannot achieve real growth if you do not have high-quality infrastructure projects, including highways, railways, power stations, ports, airports, and financial connectivity, as well as cyber connectivity. And this is the time for China to really share its experience and track record with many other countries in Asia and work together and share our strengths and weaknesses together to make sure that countries in this part of the world will benefit. Many European countries have joined AIIB partially because this region in Asia is so important that you do not want to be left out. And I would urge countries like the United States and Japan to reconsider at the appropriate time and come back and become members of AIIB. It's not politically correct to be left out. And in this particular case, it's not AIIB or China or any other existing members of AIIB do not want to welcome the United States or Japan. It's their own decision to keep themselves away from AIIB. This is wrong, and this needs to be corrected in the coming months and years.
Peter, do you believe that this is a game changer and it signifies in some way a rebalancing of the world's economy?
I think time will tell. I believe the initiative to establish the AIIB was indeed an extremely important step. And I think President Xi was correct to characterize this as the launching as a historic event. I think whether the AIIB will, over time, be able to contribute in a very significant way to infrastructure and other development in the member countries remains to be seen. I'm hopeful it will. I think it is well endowed with resources, with staff. So there is an expectation that it will make a very big contribution over time, but it is too early to express a judgment on that at this point.
Duncan, to what extent is this about influence, political influence for that matter, in the world? Because the United States up to now, with its very large block of voting shares in organizations like the IMF and the World Bank, is able to see its policies being implemented around the world. Does it see that slipping away now?
Well, I think there is a certain degree about competition of influence here, and it is true that one of the reasons why China pursued the development of this bank so consistently has been because it was blocked in institutions like the World Bank and the IMF from getting a stronger say. But I think we also need to bear in mind that there are other challenges that the bank sort of faces in terms of particularly the fact that although there are great infrastructure needs on the ground in Asia, there have been other obstacles preventing investments in infrastructure, particularly resistance from groups on the ground and so on, so that finance is not the only obstacle. But I do think that we can see already that the competition that the AIIB has provided to the existing institutions like the World Bank and the ADB has already shaken things up in a very positive way. You can see that last year, for example, the ADB increased its lending by about 19% to 27 billion. That's a big extra chunk of money. And there's no doubt in my mind that one of the reasons why that was such a big jump was because there was this competition from a new institution coming in, and they really wanted to sort of show that they were still sort of working hard on the ground.
Samir, as you pointed out a moment ago, India is the second largest stakeholder in the bank. It sits on the board, but it failed to secure a vice presidency. Is there any concern that this is a body, an organization that might be dominated by China?
Well, there will always be an element of concern in the initial periods. But I'm sure, like on other matters, as the operationalization of the bank progressed, the fears receded, this will probably disappear in good time as well. From India's perspective, why this bank particularly is important at this particular stage is in some ways to rectify the cleavage that now appears between the development finance conversations and the general international financial architecture, where by institutions in the Atlantic system talk about capital adequacy, while Asia requires credit enhancement. And what will be important to for many in India would be if this bank and the conversations around flowing out of this operations are able to correct some of these bigger financial questions and specific needs of emerging countries which require credit enhancement, SME finance, and other sorts of social and physical infrastructure, if they can be addressed by this institution. If they are, I think the vice presidency is not really that big a deal. When our economy doubles, we'll get there.